We are just a few weeks away from playoff football for your Denver Broncos, and while the rest of the league gave us zero help yesterday, we get news today that we're getting zero help from here on out, and that's exactly the way we want it in Denver. We have the latest injury news when it comes to Riley Moss, all of Joe Burrow's weapons, that and so much more, and an interesting weather update. If you're new to the channel, I'm a diehard Denver Broncos fan named Ben. Typically, this is not my setup, but I am home for Christmas break, and so here I am bringing you the most up-to-date Broncos news. Helps me out a ton if you like the Broncos, if you would like and subscribe. So all along, we know that we have just had to win one of our next three, right? And we're in. That's what everyone keeps saying, like, hey, just win one of the next three, and the Broncos are in the playoffs for the first time in a decade. And everyone was holding out hope that, like, hey, if the Kansas City Chiefs end up clinching the 1 seed, they will rest their starters that last week of the season, and then the Broncos will get to play against backups. So, of course, that's a guaranteed win, right? Well, the Kansas City Chiefs today has been reported that Kansas City Chiefs will not rest their starters for that final game of the season, and that's actually a very, very smart move for them, and that's something that when that entire narrative was going, I've said multiple times on this channel that I thought it was very, very unlikely that the Kansas City Chiefs would take an entire week off when they have an entire bye week to come. We remember Payton Manning getting the 1 seed all of those years when he was an Indianapolis Colt, and Tony Dungy and the Indianapolis Colts had a really hard time like ramping it up that first week in the season, and that was before the NFL instituted this 7 team on each side of the conference playoff, and now there's that first seed gets a bye, and so it's looking like the Kansas City Chiefs, it could be 25 days without playing, and that's just way too much for the Chiefs. So if the Broncos want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to do it by beating one of the last three, and honestly, that's exactly the way I want it. I do not want to be backing into the playoffs. A team that goes on a 3-game losing streak to end the season, they're not going to make any noise in the playoffs, and at that point, if we truly are the type of team that can't win one of our last three, we don't deserve to be in the playoffs, and I would rather have a higher draft pick and miss out on the playoffs rather than limp in. So I think that's actually a fantastic move. I also think it'll be a great measuring stick for the Broncos going into the playoffs to have another crack at Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid and this Kansas City Chiefs team that only beat us by blocking a last-second field goal. I think we match up extremely well at home. You will see Mile High just packed to the gills. You could see a world where if the Chiefs were resting their starters, if you'd bought tickets to that game, you're probably trying to sell them because that's not a fun game to go to. Now that is going to be a playoff atmosphere, and the Broncos are going to be needing to ride as hard as they can to get that dub. Other massive pieces of news across the NFL, the first one in particular when it comes to the Broncos and this game coming up here against the Bengals, is we know that probably the worst game that Bo Nix played this entire season was his game against the New York Jets. And all of us in Broncos country who actually watched that game, everyone else just takes a look at the box score and is like, oh, look, Bo Nix barely did anything. We all know from watching that game that the reason that he didn't perform that well is that the ball was absolutely soaking wet. You heard NFL analysts come out after and say, like, when you're playing with a leather ball that is that wet, it is like throwing a different ball altogether. It's like 2 pounds heavier. And it's just a different experience. And we know that Bo Nix actually outdueled Aaron Rodgers. And so how Bo Nix performed with a very sopping wet ball against the New York Jets is probably what he's going to be doing against the Cincinnati Bengals, because Ohio is just a horrible state, right? We just drove through it. It's awful. The forecast for Sunday does not look good whatsoever. It's looking like we are going to have a ton of rain, 15 to 25 mile an hour wind gusts. This is going to be a great chance to see how Bo Nix performs in adverse weather conditions, which we haven't really had to see outside of that Jets game. It's just kind of worked out in a way that Bo Nix has not had to play in adverse conditions. He didn't have to do that when he was in Auburn, obviously, and then he didn't have a ton of games with bad weather when he was in Oregon. He did play in a lot of rain. Not going too like NFL drafty, but Bo Nix does have pretty massive hands, the same size hands as Josh Allen, so I don't think he has any physical limitations to throwing a wet ball. And if anything, I think in a game when the conditions are going to be as bad as they are, that favors the better defense. And we know that the Cincinnati Bengals defense is like a turnstile, and I think I would love it if it just poured like crazy, because I think that is going to hurt the Bengals more than it's going to hurt the Broncos. So let's hope for a torrential downpour in Cincinnati and that the Broncos walk out. Don't even have to worry about how big we have to beat the Chiefs on the following Sunday, because the Broncos clinch by beating Cincinnati in an absolute downpour. Looking here at their injury report before their last game against the Browns, you just see a ton of people. They have not released injury report for this week yet, but I just think when it comes down to it, the Denver Broncos are coming off of a nice 10-day rest here where the Bengals have a short week. Sean Payton flexed into that game against the Chargers for this very reason, because he wanted 9 days to prep, 9 days to rest, 9 days to just get right to win this game, whereas the Bengals are going to have 6 days, and I think that it matches up perfectly for us. Other thing, I think that as we think of what this game is going to mean, the Denver Broncos come into this game as the second youngest team in the entire NFL. And I think this is the type of game that will really end up being a formative experience for so many of our young starters. That we got Jonah Ellis getting meaningful time. We got Chris Abrams-Drain getting meaningful time. Devon Vele, one of Bo Nix's favorite targets. We got Bo Nix, obviously, and we got Audric Estime. So it's wild to me that even this late in the season that we have 5 guys just from last year's rookie class. Then you just go back a couple years after that, and you got Riley Moss. You got obviously Quinn Miners, a lot of guys who are born and bred and drafted here by the Denver Broncos. This is going to be a formative experience. I think we have seen all year long what the Denver Broncos do off of a loss, and it motivates them in a way that is exciting and makes us proud to be fans of the Broncos. And I think they're going to use that loss to the Chargers to propel this week to just step on the throat of the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think that's something we should all be really, really excited about. One of the things that we need to get right, and I think start getting right this week, is that so often in the NFL, people are talking about getting 1,000-yard rusher, or looking at somebody like Saquon Barkley, like, could he run for 2,000 yards? And it is absolutely insane to me that we are not even on pace to have a 600-yard rusher. That is something that has to change, and obviously we're not going to eclipse that over these last 2 games that we have, but we need to start seeing one of these guys pop off and see, could Audric be the bell cow back if he gets all the carries? And if not, let's figure something out this year in free agency or in the draft. So I expect, based on seeing the stats like this and then hearing from Sean Payton, we're going to see Audric Estime get the bell cow carries over these next 2 games so that we can figure out, hey, Audric, do you think you can be our RB1 next year, or do we need to blow this thing down to the core and go out and get a brand new running back in draft or free agency? Other thing, I had rumored that a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people in Broncos country were hoping that the Denver Broncos would go out and sign the much chagrined wide receiver from Baltimore and Pittsburgh and Carolina, who kind of forces his way out of a lot of places, in Deontay Johnson. He was cut by the Ravens most recently. The Broncos did not indeed even put a waiver in for him, and the Texans were able to grab him. And so we'll see how that works out for them. They just lost another receiver for the year, and so they're a playoff team who is way more desperate than the Broncos. The Broncos are riding with these receivers that they knew coming into this year that they were going to have. So let me know, how are you feeling about this matchup against the Baltimore Ravens? I got an interview coming up in the next couple days with the Bengals, rather. I got an interview coming up with a Bengals insider. Let me know what questions I should ask. What is your score prediction? How are you feeling? Are we making the playoffs? And the answer better be yes, because we've got a ton to believe in.